Hello, and welcome to our first recording with no intro music of Beards, Books, and Bourbon. We're your hosts. My name is Mark.
And I'm Stephen.
And tonight, we're going to talk to you about Stephen King's The Shining. While we're drinking, what's that bottle over there? Grab that bottle over there. There it is.
We've got a nice bottle of Rough Rider straight bourbon whiskey tonight.
Tonight's podcast is brought to you by Rough Rider Straight Bourbon Whiskey. In case Rough Rider actually hears this podcast and they'd like to pay us a sponsorship, we just want you to know that we really like Rough Rider Straight Bourbon Whiskey.
It is an excellent bourbon, and we will we'll comment on that in a little bit as well. But what's kind of our inception of this podcast over the time that we've been thinking about this? Just to kind of give a little opening to our possible listeners, maybe the one or two that might join us first. And
we're two hairy men in the middle of a pandemic with nothing better to do, with a love of literature and a love of alcoholism. I mean, bourbon. It's a love of bourbon. I'm not going to get drunk on gin because that stuff is terrible. But bourbon, I could, wow, what was that?
We have a snoring bulldog in the background as well. So if we add to the bees, we got bourbon, books, bulldogs, and beards.
Who are becoming really cliche.
Right.
So we have no backgrounds or training in fine literature. I don't have a degree in anything regarding that. I have degrees in other things, but none of it's relevant to this show.
Well, and like you said, the part of this is kind of spawned by the pandemic. We spent a lot of time at home with families, trying to stay healthy, trying to stay safe. And one of our passions as friends, since we've known each other, we both have busy lives, 3 children each, married happily for many years. I'm a school teacher. Mark, you are
I am a financial advisor, and legally that's about all I'm allowed to say.
Right. And we've just had busy lives. And as we entered into the pandemic, since March of 2020, when everything started here in the Chicago area, we took to having weekly fireside chats. And it kind of, one thing led to another, and we discussed topics from politics to the pandemic to raising children, all this kind of stuff. And invariably, we always ended up with literature because we both have a deep love for books.
And bourbon.
There was always bourbon.
And then as our brains developed and our frontal lobes increased in size, literature was involved, but it all started with bourbon.
Right. And Mark is an author, a published author, and I am an aspiring author, and unpublished and pretty much unshared at this moment. But those types of things are a passion for us both, and so we feel that this is just maybe filling a niche that perhaps somebody needs to hear. Don't you think?
To say that I'm a published author is a little bit, it's more accurate to say that I had way too much time on my hands for a certain period of time and way too little common sense to decide to do something other than write a book and put it up on Amazon. So, yeah.
Fair enough. But still, nonetheless, the actual accomplishment of such a goal is something that a lot of us strive to, myself included.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pat myself on the back, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to reach around and scratch my butt.
Right.
So
perfect.
Right. Excellent. So tonight, we want to talk about Stephen King's The Shining because it terrified both of us in multiple ways. So how do you want to begin?
Well, so our inaugural podcast then, as we envisioned our maiden voyage, and I think most podcasts.
My hair is in pigtails right now.
You and I, and I have none, and you and I are both avid listeners to audiobooks and to podcasts and to different audio mediums.
Yes. So actually, the audiobook that we listened to, I read The Shining many years ago, many years ago, but most recently, to reacquaint myself with the story, I listened to the audiobook version that was narrated by Campbell Scott, who is, I always liked Campbell Scott as an actor. I thought he was amazing, but as a book narrator, he's like a rock and roll god as a book narrator. He's got the perfect voice and the perfect intonation. And it's like his form of performance was made for Stephen King novels to terrify me in the dead of night when I cannot sleep.
For sure. And part of one of the things that draws us to our conversations around the fire is the medium of audiobooks. I think again, we're both avid readers, as we hope many of our listeners, potential listeners,
Yes,
might be.
yes.
But there's something that has drawn you. Again, you were earlier to the listening scene than I have been.
Yeah, in my previous job, I did a lot of driving in my car, and so that ate up a lot of time. And I decided that during, it used to be that I spent a lot of time reading books, and then all of a sudden I was married and kids and a job where I spent a lot of time in my car, and so I switched over to audiobooks. So I've been listening to audiobooks since 2007,
right?
roughly.
And we're talking about near the early inception of some of platforms like like Audible and perhaps
Yes.
you were perhaps even at a time, myself included, where it was audio tapes in the car, or
Yes.
audio cassettes, or audio
Yes.
CDs.
I was listening to cassettes and CDs.
Yeah, both. Yeah, right. Which was always a great thing, and that kind of drew because we both found in the audio books, at least, the inflection of the narrator, and the sound of the voice, and the way in which that narrator was able to bring to life the words of the author. And so that has, moved our conversations in many different directions, beyond just the reading of a paper book, right?
That's right.
Which we both love equally. And so I think we both kind of navigate between electronic forms of books, paper forms of books, and audio forms of books. And, we're kind of hoping that a podcast of this nature is able to transcend the different styles in those ways.
You said transcend.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yes.
Well done. And, there's probably plenty of other podcasts that talk about books. But really,
for sure.
How many podcasts have two bearded guys in their 40s who love to drink bourbon talking about books?
With a snoring bulldog in the background,
That's
which
right.
Perhaps, if you can hear that in the background, might become a regular feature of our podcast.
That's right.
So we decided there have been many books that you and I have read simultaneously, or we have read in our lives, and we've shared the experiences with that book.
Mm-hmm.
And most recently, in this pandemic phase of our lives,
which I like to call the viral apocalypse,
which clearly probably we have
Captain
been living that.
Trips,
I don't
keeping
think
the Stephen King theme.
Yeah, I think 2020 certainly deserves the the high score on that one, but and we're not even done with the year yet, and certainly it's been quite a ride so far.
Still got 2.5 months to go.
Point. And so and I think part of it was because I came to The Shining late in my life, and we can get to that in a minute. But we my earlier point was that we share a lot of the same styles in terms of books that we like to read. And so there have been many titles that we've shared, that we've both read, either simultaneously at the same time or at varying times in our lives, and we're able to connect on those levels.
Right.
And so that is part of the passion and part of the conversation that have been going on.
Indeed.
Invariably, every conversation we have will lead back to a reading or a book, and it's something that we feel passionate enough to share.
Right. And
hope that you, the listener, will feel compelled to share your experiences and enjoy the conversation as well.
So just as a disclaimer going forward, anytime that we're talking about things like world building or character development or the development of plot, understand that we are not in any way touting ourselves as experts. We are simply two guys who really love books. Yeah. And later on in our lives, we also really love audiobooks because, hey, you can mow your lawn and fold laundry while you're listening to an audiobook. So
exactly.
When you've got multiple children, you take what you can get.
And as Mark mentioned in his earlier job when he was driving, it's the same here. I teach in a different area than where I live, and so the drive is long enough to listen to a little bit of the book, so it becomes a little bit better. And we probably should address first, before we start more on Stephen King, we probably should address first sometimes the arguments or critiques that are out there about the differences between the different mediums of reading. And there's always a critique on those who are tried and true original book lovers, those who don't feel that audiobooks should count towards reading,
Right.
and or even the electronic versions, like a Kindle or something of that nature. And I got to tell you, I've come to realize that the whole journey of reading for me is about consuming the ideas.
Yes.
And however I access those ideas, and whatever genre they are in,
Yes.
I think is important. So I would, again, there's also different schools of thought. Are graphic novels or
Right.
comic books considered reading?
Right.
Well, yeah. For me, it's all about how they make you feel, what the idea is, what kind of ideas are being shared with you,
Right.
and how the author is able to actually speak to you.
Right. And going back to what Stephen said, for me, for instance, graphic novels, that's not really a thing for me. And that boils down to, quite honestly, that I have a little bit of a learning disability. I have a visual processing problem. And so for me, comics were always kind of a mysterious thing that I couldn't consume the way that my friends could, because I couldn't figure out, visually speaking, which slide or which box I was supposed to go to next. I had that problem. But listening to a story, if I sit down and I close my eyes and listen to someone tell me a story, I'm going to remember about 98% of that story. Whereas if I sit back and I read it, I can probably get close to that same level of comprehension, that same level of memory retention, but not quite as much. And it certainly takes me a lot longer. I'm a slow reader.
And I'll go with you on that, my friend. I'm a very slow reader. So, kudos to all the slow readers out there, because I do not have the speed, which I find that an audiobook allows me to engage that a little bit easier.
Slow readers unite next week.
Absolutely. And I, my son, tends to read a little bit slower as well. And he gets frustrated. He's in 5th grade. He gets frustrated with that. And I just reaffirm to him that, it's not about the speed at which you read. It's about the journey that you get to by the end.
Absolutely.
And
Amen.
And the audiobooks allow me to. And I'm not a big graphic novel reader either, but I've had a few of them in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've enjoyed a few of them in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've explored them as much as I should have, and I need to address that in my own reading style. And perhaps this podcast or this journey that we are on will allow us to do that in a way that we haven't explored.
You never know. And I'm always interested in going back and seeing if there's something that I can do now that not necessarily I was able to do earlier in life. So, hey, we all pick up tools along the way, right?
Somehow, some way.
Stephen King, you glorious, glorious bastard. We love
how do
you.
We decide on this, right? It seems fairly random that we would start with Stephen King, but do you kind of recall how we got to that? There's a couple of things that come to my mind.
So I vaguely remember us talking about. So I think the movie Dr. Sleep was getting ready to come out, and so we were talking about that, and you said something along the lines of that you had never really gone through all of The Shining, or maybe you'd seen the original movie, but you hadn't read the book. And my response to that was, what?
Exactly. You got it. You hit it on the head. I had never read The Shining, right? The book itself had something that I had never explored. And, we are essentially children of the 80s, both of us born in the 70s.
Yep.
And certainly I experienced the movie, with my father, and my mother at the time. My mother has since passed away, but my father and I shared the Shining when we were younger, and it was a movie. For all the critiques that surround the original movie, the Stanley Kubrick film itself, including critiques from the master himself.
Right.
It was a movie that terrified me.
Yes,
and part of it probably was because I was young and some of the listeners on here might, my wife included, is nonplussed by the movie. It's just something that just does not impact him. For me, however, we can talk about the movie at another time. But for me, however, the whole Jack Nicholson, character and the way in which that plot was developed, that was my exposure to The Shining.
Oh, absolutely.
But I had never read it.
Yeah, and that was my first exposure to The Shining.
Right, exactly. It was my first and only exposure to The Shining for me.
And that it terrified me, and I think it certainly informed myself as a child, because I saw it way too young.
Same.
It informed me. It informed my perspective of the world in terms of what kind of entertainment I was going to consume for the rest of my life. Plus, also, it got me more than one date over the years. So, thank you, Stephen King. Thank you, Stephen King. But you know, and I do consider, and again, this is my uninformed opinion, I do think that The Shining is in many ways a genius work of Stanley Kubrick's, but it has very little to do with the Stephen King story.
Right. And I'm sure there's many out there that will agree with you. Many out there that
will disagree with
you
and send me a hateful email.
Well, and we're not sharing our email addresses.
That's right. We're not doing this yet.
Still, we determine that this is going to be something.
If you actually are listening to this right now, then maybe at some point we'll actually share some way for you to contact us.
And podcasts, by virtue of what they are, as with anything else in life, we always got to start somewhere. So right. And for me, the movie was the first and the only exposure that I had to. It was my initial exposure to Stephen King as a creator.
Right.
Right. It was one of my initial exposures to the genre of horror films and creepy films and spooky films. Right. And like you, it happened at a younger age where it was
much too young.
Well, it was. I mean, I don't quite remember, but I can't imagine that I was much beyond maybe 10.
I think I was 8 or 9 when I saw The Shining.
And
thank you, cable.
And exactly, and although I think in my case it was probably the VHS tape, the tried and true VHS tape.
That's right. At least it wasn't Betamax.
Here I am 36 years later, and I finally read the novel for the first time this past year.
And what did you think?
And it blew me away. And I know that's terribly cliche and probably, certainly not la haute couture of discussions. But
by the way, Stephen speaks fluent French. Right. Never mind him when he starts going into French. I will try to translate, but I will translate incorrectly, and I will do that on purpose.
Yeah, we'll use that as to bring the podcast up to a higher level.
That's right.
Right. Thank you, French people.
Culture. Thank you, President Macron.
That's right. And so I think for the first time, and I don't know, and we're coming to this first episode in a very casual way. We don't have prepared notes at the moment. We want to try this out.
We do have bourbon.
And we do have bourbon, and we know that bourbon can certainly impact the way in which notes are given.
That's right, especially bourbon called Rough Rider.
That's our perhaps future sponsor.
Rough Rider. Right. Just in case you'd like to send us a check, Rough Rider. We do really enjoy this particular bourbon that you've got here. That is, I can't read this by the firelight. By the way, we're in Stephen's garage with a campfire going and a bulldog snoring in the background. And I'm trying to read the label via campfire light. It's something like 60% corn, 35% rye, and then 5% something yummy.
And we'll come back to the bourbon.
We'll come back to the bourbon
because we envision the conversation always revolving around a different type of bourbon to explore as well. With the
each episode, we'll have something new to lead us down the rabbit hole.
And so, as I. And we're back. We're back from a break, and we're continuing our discussion, or I guess really introducing our discussion.
I broke Stephen's brain.
Right. We had to stop for a moment. I had to take a break because we got into a little bit of a laughing fit there, and we didn't want that on the recording. So we were starting with I guess we kind of left off with right around the times when we first experienced The Shining for the first time, and both of us experienced it young.
Yes,
and in its film version, which we know wasn't very popular with Stephen King himself.
No,
but
no.
certainly, I think, arguably, and apologies to movie experts out there, that it certainly is up there in the pantheon of classic horror films.
It's a visually stunning, consumable product.
Yeah. Even though on a on a purely perhaps artistic and academic level, it certainly got its share of critiques.
Sure, absolutely. And to the probably the major difference between the book and the movie is that the book is about Danny Torrance, the boy, and the movie is about Jack Torrance, the dad.
Throughout his entire life.
Throughout his entire life.
Right, or most of it, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And obviously the life of Jack Torrance is a pivotal component, a vital component for the story and for how Danny lives his life. And even going forward with the sequel, Dr. Sleep, Jack Torrance is a powerful character who has a huge impact upon the life of Danny. But really the story is kind of about Danny. It's about the kid. And Jack has his own story that we get to follow along, but the focus of the hotel, the focus of the ghosts that haunt, is really about Danny. More subtly, though, I think it is in some ways about Jack.
Right. In the movie or in the book you're talking about?
I think in the book. I think in the book.
Right.
But it's almost as an explanation for why Danny is the way that he is, and why Jack kind of goes from being the anti-hero to the antagonist.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because the evolution then into Dr. Sleep, which we certainly will get to as well, perhaps in another episode, but
that'll be another podcast.
Is stunning as well, and by far, I think one of the most emotional episodes that I've read and consumed as a reader in Dr. Sleep occurred in Dr. Sleep, right? And I think about the large swath of books, the large amount of reading that I've done in my life, and things that are funny and comic, things that are serious and gray and dark, and things that are and we'll be back after this.
Where did we leave off?
All right, we're back. We had a little technical difficulties there, but I guess that's going to be the way we deal with our.
This
first
is how
episode.
we roll when we record in the garage.
Right, in the garage. But many things have started in a garage. I don't know.
Right.
Apple started in a garage.
That's right. Steve Jobs.
So
was in a garage.
I think we're okay. So I think we left off in terms of we were left off with the. I left off at least with the idea of one of the most emotional scenes that I've read in my life. I felt was in Dr. Sleep, and I think we as readers sometimes anticipate that things like emotional scenes should happen in books that are considered literature, right, rather than books that are considered pop literature or pop culture or popular literature. Mm-hmm. And I think what I'll use the word transcended again for me, and we'll save this for Dr. Sleep, but I think it was just something that closed out the whole storyline for me from The Shining through Dr. Sleep, and, and it made me really feel it was very emotional. But back to The Shining. So after we had our first experiences as young boys with the movie,
that just sounded wrong.
And after. And so with The Shining, for me, I had never read it, right? And so, like I mentioned a little bit ago, 36 years later, I finally read the book.
Right.
And I think I only read the book at the time is because we had started talking a little bit about Dr. Sleep, and you had mentioned, have you seen Dr. Sleep? And I said no, and then we kind of talked about our experiences and our love for the film, the original film, and maybe some of the other offshoots of the film, the remakes, and so on and so forth,
right,
and whatnot. Yeah, the miniseries, all these different things, and I finally decided, well, I need to read it, but I audiobooked it.
Right, but quick shout out to Steven Weber in the miniseries. Oh my gosh, that was just amazing! What an amazing performance!
I agree.
From Steven Weber. I mean, who would have thought that the guy from Wings would turn around and spend an entire week on network television scaring the crap out of America He was just amazing. He was genuine. He was true. You will find out here very quickly that I don't think very much of the character of Jack Torrance, but he made me feel bad for Jack Torrance. He made me want to like him as a person. So
yeah, and I want to explore that comment that you might not think too much of the character of Jack Torrance, because I think that's where you and I diverge a little bit.
Yes, I think so.
Just in our experience with both of those books. Not that that's a bad thing, obviously, because we're going to diverge on many things and agree on many things. But I think just in terms of understanding how we both came from very similar beginnings with this story to somewhat different conclusions.
Right.
Of the story with similitudes in between.
Yep.
And, but 36 years later, I finally read it. And again, part of that was because we had started to talk about, what have you read it? Have you seen it? Have you,
Yep.
And I thought to myself, wow, I've never read this book. I need to read this. And I audiobooked it, and I was floored.
And he didn't sleep for a week.
And I didn't sleep for a week. But I was floored. I was moved. I was touched. I was moved. I was incredibly amazed at the depth of the story. Now, granted, I can't hold even half a candle to Stephen King. Certainly his portfolio and his talent as a writer. And I think there are many other works that he has produced that probably eclipse The Shining as masterpieces of his writing style. And we can talk about some of those as well. But I think The Shining, I certainly do. I certainly think The Shining is one of the top. And I came to you after I read the book, and I think I exclaimed to you that I couldn't believe that I had not read it earlier.
Right. And there were some tears, and there was maybe a little cuddling. But after that, everything was fine.
Beyond that, that didn't involve the bourbon. So
it was okay. Right. Well, yes, that's very true. Yes, absolutely.
And so it was just a fascinating experience, and I try to reconcile how I felt with that. And we can go chapter by chapter. Oh, we're not chapter by chapter.
Well, let's
theme by theme.
If we go chapter by chapter, then this is going to be a 7-hour long podcast.
We're not going to do that.
Podcast will never end.
We're not doing that to you.
And we'll call it Beard, Books, Bourbon, and Divorced Men.
We might, our families have suddenly split because we've done this, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So Jack Torrance is a jerk. Well, I think Jack Torrance is a jerk, and I did not at the very beginning of the book think that Jack Torrance is a jerk, and by the end of the book, I thought that Jack Torrance was a jerk who tried remarkably hard to not be a jerk, and so I don't want to take that away from him. And here I'm talking about a fictional character like he's actually a real person. Again, thank you, Stephen King, you glorious bastard, for writing such real characters that I feel so much like they're real people that I have to apologize for calling them a jerk on a podcast. So, Jack Torrance, he's a teacher. He's an author or a budding author. I think he's written a play,
and there was some success.
There was some success.
One or two publications, I believe, that he had published and were successful.
And then he had a rough road, and a lot of it had to do with alcoholism. And as we find as the story goes on, some of it has to do with his upbringing, and some of it may have to do with genetics, and some of it may just have to do with him and his choices. But here we have Jack, and Jack finds himself in dire straits. He finds himself on a tough road, and he has an opportunity towards redemption where he's going to go to a little getaway, a massive hotel in the middle of the mountains, where he's going to be a caretaker, and he's going to keep the fires lit and keep the floors clean, and he's going to write his next great American play manuscript. And he's got a family. Wendy, his wife. Jane, his wife. I'm sorry, Jesson's here. I'm sorry,
Jesson. Yep.
Hello, welcome, Gen X. Glad that you can join us. You're the only ones who got that joke. And So we also have Danny. Danny, who is a very special boy. Danny has. We should probably talk about the Stephen King universe. So Danny is a psychic, and in the Stephen King universe, in the paranormal world that is Stephen King's universe, all the superpowers, all the magic, everything is kind of based upon the idea of psychic ability. There are ghosts, there are demons, there are all kinds of things, depending upon the story that you're reading from King. But all the power kind of manifests as
power.
Psychic power.
Yeah. Rooted in and strengthened by and moved through psychic power.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in this particular book, we find out from one of the characters that somebody refers to it as the Shining, and that gives us the title of our book. And Danny shines like no other. And what we find as we get towards the end of the book is that he had to get it from somewhere, and he didn't get it from his mom. And this sets up the whole idea for the second book, for Dr. Sleep, which we're not going to talk about this podcast because we're going to make another podcast where we're going to talk about Dr. Sleep. But it sets up this whole idea. At no time does Stephen King ever say, or we ever read or see or hear that Jack Torrance is psychic. But guess what, folks? Jack Torrance is psychic.
And we don't see that in the movie.
No.
Or at least, it's probably.
I guess we see it, but it's never explained.
Right.
It's never framed for us.
It's framed as a haunting for him, right? That he's being followed and or persecuted and or terrorized by those ghosts in that hotel.
Right.
Whereas in the book, obviously, you get a much clearer picture.
Right.
That's obvious. Clearly, one of the divergences is in that difference between the book and the film.
Yes.
I don't think Jack Torrance is a jerk, right?
I know you don't.
Jack Torrance is a jerk. I don't think Jack Torrance is a jerk. I think Jack Torrance is in a tragic journey, a tragic trajectory of his life,
and he may be.
And I think I don't, and I should qualify that there certainly are personality elements that he is a jerk. He is not. He goes through many phases of not being kind. Certainly the grabbing of his son and the dislocating of the shoulder. What was it with the kid from school that ended up getting him fired from the
that's the thing. That was the thing that made me conclude that he was a jerk, was that even though the book is written in third person, what you really see it is you're looking at it through, in many cases, through Jack's eyes.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's probably the reason why Kubrick went the way that he went with the movie. Not to mention he had Jack Nicholson, and hey, if you've got Jack Nicholson, then you're going to utilize him as much as possible. But you start off at the beginning of the book thinking that this was a series of unfortunate accidents that happened, that he had a student who accused him of something that he didn't actually do, that he was a persecuted person, and under the pressure he finally snapped and he made a mistake so he beat a kid up, and there's just
there's no excuse for that in any written or audio,
right, but But it starts off with the idea that maybe he was persecuted. But by the end of the book, in his own mind, as he's losing himself to the demons, to the monsters, whatever you want to call them, to the entity that lives inside the hotel, he starts admitting some things to himself. He starts admitting that he did persecute that kid. He did short the timer. He did mock his speech impediment. He did those things, and
where are those things rooted though? You mentioned his history, right? There are flashbacks to the experience that he had with his father,
right,
and his father was a male nurse, right? If I'm not mistaken, or
something like that.
I think
yes,
and was certainly quite an abusive father.
Yes.
Beat
So
the mother.
if Jack Torrance is a jerk, then his father, John Torrance Sr., was a super jerk.
Right.
Stephen and I, by the way, while we had things paused, we made an executive decision here during the first episode that I am not going to swear. So John Torrance Sr. is a super jerk.
Right.
He is a doo-doo head. Right. We don't like him.
We don't like him.
No.
And he clearly in the scenes of how he beat Jack's mother.
Yes, he's a terrible person,
and just an awful person. And I think how I interpreted Jack as a character then was if he has this root in psychic power, which is one of the bedrocks of Stephen King's universe.
Yes.
As somebody with, and I certainly don't. I don't have anything of that nature. I don't know anybody in my life that has had that. And I'm not sure, and perhaps I have. And I don't know, and I don't know that I'll necessarily ever experience anything like that. But you can assume that that a psychic has or as I understand it, has a much more open door, I guess, to feel things in the universe.
Well, yeah. So that's kind of I think the curse of the psychics.
I think it's
Stephen
the curse
King's
of the
universe.
psychics, but I also think it weakens, but you don't have the barriers and you don't have the protections that you do if you're not open to that. Right. Now, the argument can be made for psychics who do that as a living, and or we do.
By
have
the
a
way,
train
ladies and
going by.
gentlemen, that noise is the sound of a freight train going by.
Yes,
it's a beautiful sound as it slowly lulls you to sleep. Yes. Welcome to the Beards, Books, and Bourbon meditation portion of the session
with freight trains.
Now breathe in, hold, keep holding, let it out. You're turning purple. Let it out. Okay. All right. Good. We're good now.
And the openness, Mr. Harms, the openness.
That's right.
A psychic, right? And I think what ends up happening, again, there are psychics who are in control of their powers.
Yes.
Right?
But it seems like the less power you have, the more control you have.
Right.
The more power you have, the more it's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Right. And whereas Danny shines like no other, so does Jack.
Right. But he's in so much denial.
Right. He's not able to handle it.
Buried beneath abuse and anger and alcoholism.
Right. And I think that now certainly that does not belie the fact that he is an abusive man.
Right.
Both to his wife and son and other people.
Right.
And clearly in those areas of struggle. But I think there's a tragic element to it that
undeniably.
That is hard for him to control insofar as those demons and those ghosts and those spirits that are in the Overlook Hotel and so on and so forth have that entryway to get into him.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And again, if you are experiencing, any form of abuse in your life, or these are sensitive topics, or if you feel that you have somebody in your family that is, committing those atrocities, or you yourself are a victim of that, please call for help. That is something that cannot stand, whether in the literature world and or the real world. And please reach out for help. We may be covering topics that are triggers, that are enormously sensitive for groups of people that might be listening, or groups of people that might come across these topics. And books and authors treat these topics, on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And those might be triggers in people's lives. So, there are many hotlines out there for abuse prevention and suicide prevention and mental health awareness. Please, as Mark and I go through these topics, we try to be aware of those types of things and make sure that we, and as we get more developed, we may offer those resources or connections to those resources as well. So please seek out that help.
Maybe we'll put something at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
which will be fun going back when people
Right.
actually see the thing at the beginning of the podcast and they
Right.
finally get to this point. How far in are we? Like half an hour at this
we
point?
We are 39 minutes in now.
39 minutes in now, and then we start talking about the fact that we're going to put it at the beginning of the podcast. Ooh, it's like a paradox. Next week, we're going to talk about time travel, everyone. Time travel brought to you by Rough Rider. Anytime, guys, you can give us a check.
Forget about Dr. Sleep. Yeah, forget about Dr. Sleep. Yeah. Yeah. Let's pause for a moment and talk about the Rough Rider bourbon. I think we can do that in the middle here.
Yeah, we can do that in the middle. Let's talk about Rough Rider.
How are we liking this bourbon? We're going to try it. Each episode, folks, is going to have a different bourbon.
It is.
At least for now, we're dealing with bourbon. Maybe we can explore other things as well. There's certainly the world of craft beers and different items as well. But we enjoy having a little bit of that while we're going through these conversations.
So this is Cask Select, established 2007 Rough Rider. Straight bourbon whiskey. I'm trying to read this in the dark by firelight. Forgive me in the meantime. Wilderness Hunter. There we go. There's a light. Wilderness Hunter single cask. Long Island Spirits Distillery. What's that say? Baiting Hollow, New York. Mm-hmm. Is that baiting? That's baiting. Mm-hmm. Non-chill filtered, high rye bourbon. And let me tell you that this is definitely high rye bourbon because this is the kind of bourbon that is syrupy and sweet. And then it smacks you in the face and says, "Don't touch me, you jerk. You're like Jack Torrance. I don't like you." But yet I love it because it is sweet and sassy and amazing. Stephen, help me. Save me.
Oh, you're doing fine on your own, buddy.
Digging my own grave. I'm digging my own grave very well.
This is a bourbon that has a kick to it. I find it to have a little bit of spice and just a really nice aftertaste. A good oaky sweet aftertaste.
Oh, absolutely.
But it does have the initial kick, and remember, it's not the burn that's going down. As I learned visiting the distilleries in Kentucky, it's a good old Kentucky hug.
It's a Kentucky hug. So
right.
I guess this is a Long Island kick in the mouth.
Yep, probably so. Probably so. Taxi.
Right? I lived on Long Island for 2 years. And
yeah,
let me tell
you should know. I would. Yeah, I don't.
A Long Island kick in the mouth sounds appropriate.
Right.
That sounds appropriate.
About right. It has a nice color to it. A much deeper amber color.
Yes. Almost a red.
It's almost a red.
Mm-hmm.
A very nice oaky sweet aftertaste. And a smooth finish, but a spicy beginning.
Absolutely. It's amazing, either straight or on the rocks. I think I want to try this in an old fashioned, maybe.
That would be nice,
but not necessarily using as much bitters as you normally would, because I don't think you need that much for the sweetness.
Probably not.
I think this is
and obviously old fashioned is one of the classic drinks with bourbon. One of the only classic drinks with bourbon, but by itself is the best, in my opinion.
Absolutely. This is fantastic. So, again, anytime, guys, Long Island Distillery, Rough Rider. I can do this all day long. We love it. It's fantastic. So, let's get back.
Mark is our shameless marketing executive here in our newfound podcast world.
In our newfound podcast world here at Sleepy Dog Productions. We're trying that one out, guys. Let us know what you think of that.
Right. Let us know how you think about it when we have social media for you to post on, right?
That's right. Not right now, right? Because we're not giving you that option.
Not giving it out yet. Yeah. So we're just trying this out. So
we're just trying to survive.
So let's talk about the hotel.
Yes.
How about we
the
veer
hotel
that
as
way?
A character?
We certainly talked about Jack, but I like the hotel. Obviously, plays an enormous part in both the book and the movie, and the miniseries, and everything thereafter.
Right? I think that the hotel has a theme, has a very particular theme, and I think it's actually in a quote.
Okay.
I think that theme is in the character of Horace Derwent, who is one of the. I don't want to call him an actual character because I think that the hotel absorbs the energies of people.
Well, he's certainly part of the backstory.
He's certainly part of the backstory. He was the owner of the hotel. He had an interesting demise. Entity.
So the hotel as an entity then is just an interesting topic. You had mentioned that the hotel would be glad to consume the entire family.
Yes,
and that it was multiple spirits, or as we interpret it as multiple spirits, but really codified into one.
It's just
one hungry spirit.
One thing. Yeah.
One thing, one entity, one evil, clearly evil,
Right.
But also in survival mode.
Yes, like a bulldog asleep on a lazy boy chair.
In Sleeping Dog Publications, what we do?
Sleeping Dog Productions.
Sleepy Dog or Sleeping Dog?
Sleepy Dog.
Sleepy Dog
Sleepy
Productions.
Dog.
Yes, Sleepy Dog Productions.
That's right. Someday people will listen to this initial podcast and like, that's where it all began.
Well, I hope so. That's the key. I hope that, and we hope there's listeners out there that identify with just kind of regular armchair readers, right?
That's right.
We have a little bit of expertise in our own fields, of course, but certainly a lot to share, I guess.
Or at least we'd like to.
Yeah, they're trying to.
We would like to just send our blathering out into the universe, and we hope that you enjoy what it is that we offer.
And so Jack doesn't escape.
Jack does not escape.
Jack does not escape, although I think that changes in the end of Dr. Sleep, which we'll talk about another time. But
yes,
but Jack does not escape. Jack is a victim of his entire life.
Yes. Well, yes, it's true. He is, and so that's where I have such a hard time. Is that it doesn't excuse the things that he does throughout his life.
Not at all.
But he is, just like you said, he is a tragic character. Terrible things happen to him, and in turn, he does terrible things, and that I think is another theme that King is talking about, particularly as he extends that forward into Dr. Sleep, is the idea of generational trauma.
Excellent point.
And the idea that we can only change the pattern when we're willing to accept the fact that things are broken. It's very much Alcoholics Anonymous. It's very much the 12-step program. And I'm not in any way disagreeing or belittling that. I absolutely agree with it. Knowing where you come from, knowing why your ancestors did what you did, and then making a conscious choice to deviate from that pattern is probably a life lesson that most people can relate to in one form or another. And the fact that he discusses that in the book, I think is beautiful and true. And it's one of the things that helps those characters come to life.
Very much so. But he doesn't escape.
He does not escape.
Danny and Wendy escape.
Yes.
And clearly Danny's power is so vast.
And by the way, in the books, Halloran escapes too.
Yes.
In the movie, spoiler alert, he does not.
Right. Or we don't quite know. I mean, I guess he gets an axe to the chest.
He gets an axe to the chest.
That's pretty significant.
He's kind of done.
Yeah.
That's why in Dr. Sleep
he definitely gets beaten up in the book.
In the book, he gets massively beaten up. Well, Wendy gets beaten up too. In the book, Wendy's never the same. When he goes through all kinds of rehab and she has problems with her body throughout her entire life, and I may be remembering this incorrectly, but that residual damage actually does end up leading to, or the complications of that damage ends up leading to her death in the end.
Yeah, for sure. You're right. Yeah. But they make it out.
Yes, they make it out
in the book, and they make it out as a function, I think, of Danny's resilience and his power.
Yes,
coupled with Jack's weakness and inability to. Jack becomes wrapped up in a tug of war with the hotel.
Yes,
and that distracts the hotel from its mission to destroy the entire family.
And that is Jack's one shining. Shining. I said shining.
It probably works here.
Thank you, everybody. That is Jack's moment where he steps forward and tries to earnestly undo. And let me go back. I feel like Jack, particularly in the relationship of his son, Jack spends a lot of time trying to redeem himself in the eyes of his son. And one of the things that is the window into his soul that allows the hotel to get his hooks into him is the guilt that he feels over that. and his struggle with alcoholism and the trauma that he has dealt with himself also. All of those things allows the hotel to drag him down further. But Jack tries very hard to redeem himself at the very least in the eyes of his son. And in that one thing, I think that's where the majority of Jack's power comes from.
And I also think he's realizing that, he's cognizant of that, and in some way he's trying to save his son and Wendy from the hotel itself by going into that battle alone.
Yes, absolutely.
And by sacrificing himself.
Yes, absolutely.
Which you're right. That is a redeeming factor to the jerkitude that you have with his with his life. I mean, that is that, and we see that then come full circle into that almost reconciliation in Dr. Sleep.
Yes. In fact, that's probably what the alternate title would be. It would just be the reconciliation of the Torrance family of the Jerkitude.
The reconciliation of the Jerkitude, written by Stephen King, now available wherever paperbacks are sold. I'm filling time because Stephen has walked away from the microphone to tend to the fire, and so you get to listen to me.
Oh, maybe they can. Can you speak up, Stephen? Can we hear you? Oh, thank God. This is getting hard. It's actually starting to hurt my throat to talk like this.
We have agreed to probably try to keep our podcast to a normal time limit. We have podcasts that we both listen to that subscribe to the philosophy that keeping it at a half an hour are good. I don't know that my dear friend over here, Mark, and I can keep things to a half an hour. But I do know that there are also podcasts out there that are in the hour range, and I certainly consume a lot of podcasts, as I'm sure you, our listeners, do, that go much longer than an hour.
Welcome to Deep Tracks on Beards, Books, and Bourbon.
Wasn't that a radio station?
It was something like that. Yeah. It was totally.
Well, certainly it was smooth jazz, which I
smooth jazz.
And so we probably we'll probably wrap this up and see the next couple minutes here, see what perhaps our final thoughts are on The Shining. There certainly is no way that we can do exhaustive justice to all the themes in The Shining, but this was our opening episode. We felt compelled to treat these two books initially, which I guess, part of it is certainly, we're in the Halloween month, of course, so it's kind of appropriate. But also because we both felt moved enough by this to kind of be our opening book. And perhaps we'll come back and revisit it another time. But we'll add some disclaimers to our recordings to know that we're trying to be stewards of the books that we read, but also we are creative individuals, by nature, and so we'll take each episode as it comes.
Yeah, but, going forward, if you're looking for the podcast that has the unbiased, objective critique of every single book that we read, and some of them are going to be books that we love, and some of them are going to be books that we hate, and we're going to give you our honest opinion about those, you've probably come to the wrong podcast. We're probably just going to talk about the books that we really love. Right. So get ready for the Love Fest, everybody.
We are certainly not the New York Times, list of books.
No, we're not even the Daily Herald of Hoffman Estates, Illinois.
We might, and certainly we are not editors, nor are we publishers, nor are we booksellers. And again, we are both,
I guess technically I'm a bookseller.
Well, and technically we both love the written word, and we both try in our own ways to engage the written word.
Yeah. But I have written books.
We also acknowledge where we are at in terms of our lives, and knowing that there's so many out there that are in the wonderful world of literature and writing and business and selling and marketing of the books that have particular expertise that we don't have. But we are sharing as amateurs, but as people that are also very much in love with reading.
Yes.
And hoping that one of our creative outlets is to engage in creating a podcast that might reach out and speak to people.
Absolutely.
Do you have a final thought about The Shining?
Unmask! Unmask! or come here and take your medicine, you little pup.
Or was it Little Pup or Young Pup?
Young pup.
Might have been
Young Pup. I think it's Young Pup. Yeah. The Shining is an amazing book. If you've read it, fantastic. Go read it again. If you haven't read it, fantastic. Go read it right now. It is absolutely a masterwork of American literature. Yes, it's in the horror genre, but it's, one of the things that we really didn't cover, and so maybe at some point we'll come back and we'll talk about this topic, is the idea of the line that The Shining walks along, where depending upon your perspective, this could be all about ghosts, or this could be all about madness. Maybe there's no ghosts at all. Maybe it's just a family of crazy people who are swirling down the rabbit hole, along with a couple of other people who've pushed them down the crazy path. And that's very much kind of in the realm of Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House. And Shirley Jackson, we know, was an inspiration to Stephen King,
pioneer.
And a pioneer within the horror genre itself. If you haven't read The Haunting of a Hill House, go ahead and read that one too, because we're probably going to talk about it at some point.
For sure. My final thought, my final thought on The Shining, at least for this particular episode, and I'm sure we'll draw it into our further discussions, is just a family in pain, right?
A family in pain,
and a family in the struggles, not only to be a family and to hopefully take care of each other, but a family that struggles with things that are normal things that we might be used to struggling with, but also have another layer of things that none of us may ever experience.
Yes, absolutely.
And those are the things that are the otherworldly.
And that's one of the things about King's writing that makes him great is that he writes real people in mostly real circumstances and real moments,
dealing with those challenges,
extraordinary events. Yeah, absolutely.
Framed sometimes in a very mundane and normal event, like traveling to a hotel for a little bit, right?
That's right.
And so that's where that talent and that magic and that power of his writing comes into play.
How many of us at some point in our lives have taken a job that we didn't really want, but we needed because we needed the money?
Yeah.
And
therein lies Jack Torrance.
And therein lies Jack Torrance. And then he's saddled with the terrible extraordinary.
Yeah. So that I think that concludes our final thoughts, my friend. We've reached kind of the end of our first discussion of The Shining. Certainly, again, by no means exhaustive.
Oh my God, we did it!
We did it.
But we made it, and we're hoping that this is something that you enjoy.
I know I enjoyed it.
We are certainly going to try and get this out and try to get a little bit more, a little bit more solid at this new medium that we are trying. And next time we do this, we will have a new bourbon to share. But we did enjoy the product from Rough Riders.
We enjoyed Rough Rider, brought to you by the Long Island Spirits Distillery. Guys, if you'd like to contact us, anytime now, that's, we've been talking for over an hour, and we still haven't received our check. Stephen, have we received our check?
Not that I know of.
No, we haven't received our check. But despite that fact, despite that unfortunate fact, we have really enjoyed Rough Rider.
Totally. Thank you, friends, for joining this first episode of Beards, Books, and Bourbons. We wish you a very good night.
Good night.